The NASCAR Camping World Truck Series raced on dirt last Friday night, and it was a total disaster. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. I hope your week is off to a wonderful start. I usually only do Out of the Groove race review videos for NASCAR Cup Series events. We'll talk about things that happen in the Xfinity race sometimes we'll cover trucks, occasionally we'll talk about the SRX or IndyCar. ARCA occasionally slips in there, but when it comes to dedicated race review videos, I typically focus on the NASCAR Cup Series. Well, this week, I'm gonna make an exception because Friday night's Camping World Truck Series event at Knoxville, Iowa was a total disaster. Had everyone talking Friday night into Saturday morning, and even still Sunday and today, people are still honestly talking about this race because it was that memorable for mainly all the wrong reasons. I mean, unless your name is Austin Hill, guy's first win of the season, and on dirt, he seemed really excited. I don't think anyone else was smiling after Knoxville Friday night. Now, the way I see it, there are really only two things you could possibly blame for the mess we saw Friday night. You can blame the racetrack. You could say NASCAR doesn't belong on dirt, period. Or you could say that NASCAR and the folks at Knoxville did not prepare the track properly for, 40 massive stock car race cars to drive around it for 150 laps. You could say the rains earlier in the day and all these other contributing factors affected the racetrack and led to a suboptimal racing surface. Or you could put your blame on the drivers driving the race cars, trucks. That's so weird to say. A lot of young drivers in the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series, a lot of hungry drivers trying to prove themselves, prove their worthiness of racing in one of the top levels of NASCAR. A lot of drivers with little dirt experience mixed in among a few dirt veterans. You had Donnie Schatz, 10-time World of Outlaws champion racing. You had Kyle Strickler, the high side tickler, and a couple others sprinkled throughout the field. But you had a lot of young drivers that don't have a lot of experience that are known for racing quite aggressively. I mean, you had multiple drivers upset with Derek Kraus after the race, hitting him on the cool down lap. So you can blame the drivers for being too aggressive, too careless, or you can blame the racetrack for not being prepared properly, or you can blame a bit of both. I'm gonna try to make sense of everything that happened Friday night in this video here today because, boy, I don't wanna see sloppy, messy NASCAR races like that one anymore. I mean, my goodness, it was a 75-mile race that took 2.5 hours to complete. NASCAR fans on social media losing their minds, members of NASCAR media just begging for it to be over. The race featured 4 overtime attempts and ran 29 laps past its scheduled distance. I love, FS1 had Kevin Swindell, dirt racer, in the booth to add color commentary during the event, and by the end of this thing, he was at a loss for words. He didn't know what to say anymore because I'm sure he has never raced in anything quite like what he was trying to commentate that night. With the beaten and banging bent-up sheet metal, everyone was getting junked. In fact, the only clean truck in the field may have been the one that ended up winning the race, Austin Hill, so credit to him. But I'm talking a little bit about the race and showing you some of these highlights, like this massive pileup on, I believe this was the first or maybe the second overtime attempt. This led to a red flag, of course. I'm talking about and showing you guys some of these highlights just to remind everyone just how disastrous this race truly ended up being. You had Michael Waltrip and Vince Welch just trying to laugh it off in the booth. Like I said, Kevin Swindell didn't even know what to say. We can make a whole argument that NASCAR shouldn't race on dirt. I don't think that's necessarily true. NASCAR's technically been racing on dirt for decades. NASCAR grew up on the beaches of Daytona. You've all heard the stories. I understand that NASCAR cars today are very different than NASCAR cars from the 1950s and 60s and such, and I think there are modifications that NASCAR should continue to explore with the Cup cars, the Xfinity, and the Truck Series trucks if they're going to continue racing dirt. You got to address the mud getting stuck to the front of the cars and overheating the engines. You got to address the windshields getting muddied up, things like that, sure. But I think NASCAR's proven that they can race on dirt and it can be an interesting and competitive event. So I'm not completely against NASCAR racing on dirt, but I do think they need to adjust the formats of these races. Namely, looking at this Knoxville race, for example, you had the heat races early in the day, and I thought all the heat races were very competitive. The groove seemed to be pretty wide. You had the Highland lane working, the middle lane, the bottom lane working, and I thought the racing was pretty competitive and fairly clean, but still aggressive. I thought the first stage, really the first two stages for the most part, were pretty entertaining. Good, actual, solid racing. But stage 3, especially as we got later and later, the track became really one groove right around the bottom. It was like old school Bristol, but on ice, because the track was that slick, because it's dirt, you know? You throw a bunch of inexperienced drivers out there, and naturally it led to chaos and carnage. So I think what NASCAR should have done and should do going forward is they need to allow for like a 20-30 minute intermission or so in the middle of these races, these long NASCAR races, to actually bring the water truck out or do whatever you gotta do and work on the track to hopefully keep multiple grooves viable, you know, because that's what really went wrong at Knoxville. The bottom lane was the only lane drivers could use by the end of the race, and that was a problem. We saw some of those issues at Bristol. You know, the track got too dusty at one point, and they actually did red flag, or they did briefly halt the race at Bristol to, you know, wet the track back down, and, you know, they switched to single file. They did a bunch of stuff at Bristol to try and make it work on the fly, but these dirt races, these dirt tracks, you gotta allow for time to rework the track. NASCAR just needs to admit that, hey, we gotta do it. NASCAR fans may not like halftime. We might need to implement a halftime, though, if we really insist on racing dirt. So yeah, granted the track was not in great condition by the end of Friday night's race, but I don't want to let the drivers off the hook. Because what we saw Friday night, I think, speaks to a much larger trend that is honestly accelerating faster and faster as the years go on. And that's the trend of drivers being more aggressive. And sometimes that aggressiveness is bleeding over into carelessness. And not just that drivers are getting more and more aggressive, but drivers just don't show each other respect anymore. At least not the same way drivers from the previous generation, more often than not, showed each other respect on the racetrack. And when you get a bunch of young drivers who don't really show each other respect on the racetrack battling at a dirt short track, you get a lot of hurt feelings, and you get a lot of angry tweets, like Carson Hocevar after the race, "What a joke." Matt Crafton after the race tweeting circus tents and clown emojis to describe the event. Again, the track was not properly prepared by the end of this race, so I can't put all the blame on the drivers, but this is only the latest example of drivers being aggressive and perhaps a little too aggressive, careless in NASCAR events and leading to carnage, leading to wreckfest. We've seen this not just in trucks or in ARCA or K&N, we've seen this in Xfinity, we've even seen this in the NASCAR Cup Series in recent years. And actually, if you don't take my word for it, here's what a couple, NASCAR Cup Series veterans tweeted the other night in response to that Knoxville race. First, Denny Hamlin tweeting, "Guys like Tony Stewart would grab me by the neck when he saw me driving like a jackass back when we were teammates. Today, it's just a different world, and the code in which drivers treat each other is different now." Keyword is different. So Denny Hamlin sort of playing the fence there. He's not necessarily saying that, the way Tony Stewart handled things, much more physical, confrontational back in the day, is necessarily better than the way younger drivers today are handling things, but he is pointing out that they are clearly different. I thought this was interesting as well. Brad Keselowski replying to this tweet, the original tweet said that NASCAR wants drivers to not have a connection with the car so that they hold nothing back. And Brad Keselowski replying, yes, no major team wants the driver to regularly touch the race car. This is due to the fact that it used to be god-awful for a driver's mindset to get too attached to a car because then the driver wouldn't push it hard enough. Perhaps nowadays, the pendulum has flipped. That's super interesting, but Keselowski implying there that maybe now things have dipped too far and now drivers don't care enough about the cars whatsoever, that they're perfectly comfortable going out and door slamming, wrecking them for wins or trying to win, things like that. So I thought it was interesting to hear both Brad Keselowski and Denny Hamlin kind of chime in right there. So it's not just me saying this. I've observed it. I think we've all observed that drivers, younger drivers these days, have gotten more and more aggressive and maybe less respectful. But veteran drivers who've been around a lot longer than I have also noted clear differences between, the driver culture. I like how Hamlin referred to driver code. It certainly is different. That's the most broadly way we can describe it. If you ask me, if you want me to try and pinpoint, a driver or an era where things began to trend this direction, you could look back to like the early years of Kyle Busch's career when he occasionally made some aggressive mistakes. But if you ask me, I think Kyle Busch has matured significantly over the course of his career. Like, yes, maybe this is a bad time because he did nudge his teammate Daniel Hemrick out of the way for the win at Atlanta in the Xfinity race this weekend, but that was clearly an accident. It wasn't like an egregious move. It was just a slight bump draft on the restart, gone a little awry, and that screwed Hemrick up. But Kyle Busch was quick to own up to it. He clearly didn't mean to do it. Kyle Busch still makes some aggressive mistakes, but more often than not, he is very much in control of his race car. I believe he has matured dramatically as a driver throughout the duration of his career. So if you ask me, this trend really began with Joey Logano, because Joey Logano is a driver who I don't think has really changed at all over the course of his career. We had Mark Martin on the show last year, and Mark Martin kind of helped discover Joey Logano. You know, he saw the talent Logano had and tried to get him on people's radar. And, you know, when Joey Logano bumped Mark Martin out of the way for the win at Pocono in 2012, I mean, hear what Mark Martin thought about that.
Because of the integrity I have and the person that I am, I would kill myself before I would move Bobby Allison for a win. And this is what happened at Pocono. You know, Joey moved me, and I would have been 53 years old. You know, it's hard to win a race at 53 years old, and I was looking good. So that race, I'll probably never completely get over.
To me, Mark Martin's reaction there to a simple bump and run from Joey Logano speaks volumes about the differences between the current generation of drivers' mentality, you know, in it to win it, win at all costs. If someone's upset with how I raced them, that's their problem, not my problem, compared to Mark Martin, perhaps the most respectful, successful driver in NASCAR history, at least in recent NASCAR history. The contrast between their POVs of that incident, that tells you all you need to know about the difference Denny Hamlin's talking about in driver code 20, 25 years ago to the last 5 or 10 years. And like I said, Joey Logano has never evolved. He's never changed. Like, his mentality, that side of it, is winning out right now. That is prevailing because, you know, Denny Hamlin incident, Auto Club in 2013, Matt Kenseth incident in 2015, Martin Truex Jr. was upset with the bump and run at Martinsville in 2018, when Joey Logano just cleaned out Kyle Busch at Las Vegas in 2017 and got punched in the face afterwards, to even this year when his own teammate Brad Keselowski was mad at Logano for blocking in the Daytona 500. So Joey Logano's driving style has never evolved, has never changed, which tells me that this code of every man for themselves, be aggressive at all costs, that code is winning out. That is now the prevailing ideology within the NASCAR garage. And that goes for not just ARCA, Trucks, Xfinity, that goes for the NASCAR Cup Series as well. I mean, look at Ross Chastain, was known for being an aggressive race car driver, still is an aggressive race car driver today. He's made it to the NASCAR Cup Series and drives for, you know, a solid organization. And, you know, I know next year, because his team just got sold, we don't know what his plans are for next season, but I think it's safe to say Chastain will be around for at least a little while longer. And I think has the talent to maybe win races one day, but he's made enemies before. He's been aggressive on the racetrack before. I'm just trying to think of other drivers that have come up since Joey Logano. You know, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Kyle Busch literally called Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Wrecky Spinhouse on national TV this weekend.
Which driver causes the most crashes? It's gotta be Wrecky Spinhouse, right?
I mean, say what you will about the memes, but, you know, Stenhouse has been known to make some aggressive mistakes in the past. I mentioned Derek Kraus this weekend at Knoxville, a young driver who's been aggressive back in his ARCA days, you know, made some enemies at Knoxville this weekend. Going back to his ARCA days, many of his back and forths were with Hailie Deegan, another driver who's coming up and I think perfectly embodies this new NASCAR driver code. Hailie Deegan's won some K&N West, now ARCA West races, and at least a couple of those she won by knocking people out of the way, seeing a sliver of daylight there on the inside lane and sticking her whole race car in it and knocking everyone out of the groove. If you've watched the ARCA East and West or the K&N East and West series the last few years, you've probably noticed a lot of bumping and running, typical short track action, but sometimes on steroids. I mean, just this past weekend in the ARCA East race, I believe on the final restart, Corey Heim just sent Ty Gibbs into the first turn to get the win. Like, just sent him, not just a little bump and run. He didn't give Gibbs a chance to battle back. He sent Ty Gibbs through that first turn. Now, apparently, I didn't see the race. Ty Gibbs maybe bumped this guy a little bit early on in the race, so it was sort of payback. But still, both drivers being aggressive leads to guys just driving through other guys. And that's the point I want to make. There's a fine line between good, hard, aggressive racing and careless racing. Like, sure, you might look at, you know, the Martin Truex Jr. Logano incident in Martinsville and say, Truex is a little butthurt about that. That was just a good bump and run. You might even look at that Mark Martin, Joey Logano incident from 2012 and say, hey, Mark Martin's whining a little too much. That was a clean bump and run. You might think Kevin Harvick overreacted a bit to Ross Chastain's move at Darlington a few years ago. You may think all that, and I may agree with you in some of those cases. Not all those moves were careless, but they were all certainly aggressive, and over time, the aggressiveness has only ratcheted up. You haven't seen any of these drivers get less aggressive. Is Ricky Stenhouse less aggressive today? No. Is Joey Logano less aggressive? No. Hailie, no, not less aggressive. They are, if anything, only getting more aggressive year in, year out. And at some point, that aggressiveness is going to reach a peak. It's going to reach a breaking point where it slides over into carelessness. And that's sort of what we saw at Knoxville this weekend. We've seen it at other races. We've seen it sometimes at super speedways in recent years as well. We've seen careless racing prevail over good, clean, competitive racing that, Mark Martin would be proud of. Here's the thing, I like contact. I think that's what makes NASCAR special. I mean, you don't see bump and runs in Formula One or IndyCar, hardly ever. You don't see much any contact, wheel to wheel, beating and banging action, those other major motorsport series. But NASCAR, because at certain tracks the speeds are low enough, at other tracks, at all tracks, they have fenders on the cars protecting the wheels at least a little bit. Drivers are not afraid to use the bumpers, and I think that's led to some of NASCAR's most iconic and memorable and entertaining moments. But I'd hate to see NASCAR devolve into the type of series where guys are just driving through each other into every corner. Like, how do you pass the guy for a lead? You just run through him and deal with the consequences. Never. Like, I don't want to see NASCAR devolve into that kind of racing series where there's no care being shown to your competitors, where it's just door slam a guy, don't try to pass him cleanly. I don't want to see the art of competitive, clean, wheel-to-wheel, side-by-side action fade away. I hope that art still exists. I hope that there are drivers coming up through the pipeline, or drivers that still exist today, that are willing to continue practicing that magnificent art. I can appreciate great, clean racing more than someone who just runs through guys and knocks them out of the way to win. As much as Dale Earnhardt is an icon of the sport's history, there's some instance in the past I thought he was in the wrong. But talking again about that driver code, again, the code right now seems to be every man for themselves. Do what you gotta do to win the race. If it means making someone angry, so be it. Knock them out of the way. Win the race at all costs. I honestly wonder, will any driver step up and say, no, we can't do that anymore? We've seen glimpses, like Martin Truex Jr. upset with Joey Logano at Martinsville last year. Harvick, other drivers occasionally will say something, but it's clearly not making much of a difference. The racing continues to get more and more aggressive, and occasionally we get wreckfest disasters like we got at Knoxville this weekend. So I wonder, if the drivers don't step up and say something, will the team owners eventually step up and say something, especially with the introduction of the all-new next-gen car over the next couple of years? Wrecking a next-gen car is going to be expensive out the gates. Are team owners going to step in and say something? Like, will they get upset? Will they get in their drivers' faces if they wreck too much equipment? Like, will that happen? I have no idea. Who will the enforcer be? What driver code will become the norm going forward? It looks like racing is getting more and more aggressive as the years go on. And honestly, looking around, I don't know that anyone's going to step up and get in the way of that. Maybe the team owners, because they don't want to see bent up next-gen cars next year and the years after. But right now, I don't see anyone forcing that change. Again, I always prefer hard, competitive, clean racing over just driving through people. But at the same time, while there's an art in clean racing, there's an art to the bump and run. I think Joey Logano's move on Mark Martin at Pocono in 2012 was pretty slick, honestly. I get where Mark Martin's coming from, but it was a pretty smooth bump and run. Didn't wreck Mark Martin, and Mark Martin had a shot to repay Logano if he really wanted to. To me, that type of racing isn't really the problem. It's the racing like we saw at Knoxville this weekend, or to some extent what we saw in the ARCA race the other night, where you're just driving through guys for the win with no care in the world, no consideration for other people on the track. It's just who's got the most bumper left on their car at the end of the race. That's who's going to win. I don't really want to see NASCAR become that kind of racing series. And right now it's mostly in the trucks and ARCA and lower levels, but occasionally we see glimpses of it bleed into the Cup Series, and I don't want to see that continue. I don't want to see that get worse than what it is right now. That's just me. I still like clean racing. Clean racing still has a place in stock car racing, in my opinion. Maybe that's not a popular opinion anymore. I have no idea, but that's all I've got for this episode. Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. Whose side are you on? Do you like the uptick in aggressive racing, even if it leads to the occasional wreckfest? Or do you wish for the days of hard, clean, respectful racing to maybe make a return? What are your thoughts? What do you want to see NASCAR racing look like in the coming years? Leave your comments down below. But that is going to do it for this episode. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. We talk NASCAR day in, day out. As always, a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters as well. I couldn't do this show without your tremendous support. Plenty more to discuss later this week. Got some other videos in the works as well. I appreciate the support, and I will see you all in the next episode.